Some things I may know by one or the other only.
Yes.
For example, I know the existence of Thule, Greenland, because I've seen it on a map. I've met people who've been to Thule. It's not a fact I can reason out from first principles, and I certainly have not experienced it myself. But that fact is, as reported to me by reliable sources, is consistent with everything else that I know by reason and by experience. And then similarly with the others. Now, historically, there have been other theories of epistemology. The ancient Greeks believed that you could reason from first principles to get certain knowledge. The important thing that I want to highlight here, touching on the previous discussion, is that in no case for human beings is absolute knowledge possible. The knowledge that we're talking about that comes from these three sources is knowledge as certain as human beings are capable of getting. But for us to say, for me to say, even as a physical scientist, that, you know, I've done these experiments, I've done these theoretical models, I've talked to other great scientists, and we all agree that X. We're unanimous. Now, when you come back and say, so are you saying that X is true? And for that, I'd have to say, as the ancient Muslim scholars say, Allahu Alam, God knows best. As near as we, as human beings, are able to determine, X is true.
I'd love the answer. The criteria for truth, how does a secular humanist define this?
Well, I think a secular humanist is neither in a better nor worse position than others.
This we agree.
On this question. I think following up on some things that I was thinking, is truth something that we find?
Yes.
Or is it something that we construct? And my answer to that is very simple, yes.
Yes.
That, in other words, it is both to a degree. I think that, as George was sort of intimating, if we turn inward, how do we know we answer we constantly question these, then we can get into a position where, as some in the postmodern schools, for instance, say there is no such thing as truth out there. It's all socially, individually constructed. And also, if we look at what is being said, we find that it's in a political context, it's exploiting women, or it's colonial and this sort of thing. I think this sort of thinking is becoming, thankfully, less fashionable than it was 15 or 20 years ago. But I do think there's one of the real interesting things about truth. I do firmly believe, and I think most secular humanists would be, the truth is there somewhere. And certainly I would agree that we can only have at best, a workable perception of it. And in the scientific tradition, I think is very well put by Imad al-Din, is that we can do our best, but whether it's really true, who can say? I mean, only God could say in that sense. But it also is clear, the reason for that hesitation is we realize that we are also, as we are finding truth, we are also constructing it. We're dealing with it in our particular context, with the questions that arise out of our work and the closely related work of our colleagues.
Interesting. George, criteria for truth.
There's a lot of talk about criteria, and that's in your question, but everybody is avoiding criteria, you know, and I would like to do the same. If you don't mind.
Sure.
But you know what I would do, to add to what's been very well said here, is to take it more from a metaphysical point of view. You know, they say that there are characteristics of being. Unity, it has its identity, it's not something else, it's itself. It's open to intellect, and that's truth of being, and that it's good, it's attractive to the will. The Hindus would say Sat Chitananda, existence, and that's living. It's the living reality. Chit, that's consciousness, but that's truth that is aware, self-aware, etc. And bliss, Ananda, the good. So I would take that consideration of truth, not perhaps so much from the point of view of knowledge, but the fact that reality, that being is open to the mind and open to then being known, always challenging it, never able to say this is the end and we've got this definitively and it will never be seen better or from a different angle or more deeply or more richly. But the truth is there attracting us to plunge in, and that it will be exciting, and that therefore it will be blissful. That this is the reality, and then knowledge, of course, is the human act of awareness. But that being is not obscure, that it's not hiding, that it's not tricky, it's not deceptive, it's not destructive, but on the contrary, it's
beautifully stated. Plato said a lot of things, but one of the things that's interesting that he said is that knowledge is justifiable true belief. Knowledge is justified true belief. The question is, does one gain knowledge just by believing something that happened to be true? Madadine, if something just happened to be true and you believe it, is that real knowledge?
Well, I'm not sure that, to me, when Plato says justifiable belief of of some truth, that I think in that term justifiable, he's implicit is that it's not something that it just happens to be true. That there's some connection between the mechanism, whatever it may be, by which you justify this belief and the fact that it's true. Now, I have to say that, again, going back to, well, what does it mean to be true? I think ultimately what we mean by truth is that at the very end, when all is said and done, when all the veils fall away, this fact remains standing. Or as I like to put it, as opposed to a falsehood, which if you believe in it is going to bite you on the nose sooner or later. But how, before the end comes, if the end ever comes, how do you know? How are you able to make this correspondence? It almost becomes a circularity. We're asking how you know something. That's the whole point of epistemology. And now having defined it by this definition of Plato's, we then have to go back and say, well, how do we know it's true?
Yes.
We're starting back at zero again. So I'm bothered by that question. I don't think it's, I don't think it's helpful in the study of epistemology, other than the fact that we do want what we pursue to be true. But again, I go back to what I said before. When you use the word justifiable, it seems to me implicit in that is that you believe there's some kind of correspondence between the mechanism by which you justify your belief and the fact that something is true.
Marvelous answer. I'm going to ask a quick question to my good friend here, Don. Don, can you give me just how is knowledge acquired? We have about 30 seconds to answer that.
I think knowledge is acquired through experience. I think that we have, as human beings, the way our brains are structured, to acquire knowledge, which is useful, information that is useful for our survival, and having a brain that has evolved to higher capacities. We want to limit knowledge, as opposed to belief or opinion, to those things which I think the criteria that Ahmadine mentioned are logical, have an authoritative background. In other words, that needn't be that it's an authoritative text that can't be questioned. It means there's good testimony, and there's no dispute with that it's not just someone's crazy idea. It's a social thing. And also that it is rational, logical, that there are not tensions within the belief or that would prevent it from being knowledge.
You've just ended our show. Well, that's another Scholar's Chair. We'll see you next time on another edition of Scholar's Chair. Good night.